Does anybody have a testimony or anything they want to give before we start the Bible study today? I will say this, since we have new people here, we do not pass an offering plate here. We expect all of God's people to tithe. I think most people in here know what that is. And we just simply ask that you pray about part of it, at least, going to this ministry. It's called Faith Baptist Church, a congregation of God's covenant people. We're not incorporated, we're not a 501c3, but we are organized and we are meeting and have met for many years. And if you want to give an offering today, then when you leave, before you leave, give it to my wife. She takes care of the money. And you know, God gives us people to help us sometimes. I love the Word of God, and I feel like I can give a good lesson, but I'm not necessarily the best money manager in the world either, so God gives me somebody to help me with that. Or you can give it to me, and I'll stick it in my pocket, and it'll go to her later, so any way you want to do that. Last time as we studied the Bible, we started talking about the law. We've done that now for 2 or 3 Sundays. Because that is the weakness among God's people today, is they believe the law is no longer in vogue. They believe that the law, somehow or another, has all been nailed to the tree. And I will be the first to tell you that all of the law that Jesus Christ fulfilled, which was the sacrificial law, it has been done away with as far as practice. But I will do it like, I had a preacher one time years ago, and we were discussing how that God fulfilled part of the law and it's no longer in force. And he looked at me and he said, "Do you need a lamb?" I said, "No." He said, "You're wrong. You're wrong, you do need a lamb." I looked at him kind of strange, and he said, "It just happens that Jesus is your lamb. But you still need a lamb." And that's the way you have to look at all of the law that was fulfilled. When you look at it, you ask the question, yes, I still need this. Does Jesus fulfill this? We're going to come across some of that in this study. I don't know if we'll get, there's no way we can get all the way through this booklet. You're going to have to take it home and work the rest of it. But I want us to look at it because the 28th chapter of Deuteronomy gives us the blessing that God would give us if we keep the law. And it also gives us the curse. Now, last time we studied the blessings, but let's look at the curse. We have to remember that the prophecies are to our ancestors and their descendants. We saw it fulfilled in our fathers, and we're seeing it fulfilled in our day as far as the curses are concerned. So we're going to go to Deuteronomy 28:15. If you don't have a notes and you have a Bible, then you can go there and you will be able to follow along with us and make notes. In Deuteronomy 28:15 it says, "But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee." In the Hebrew, the words "come upon" and "overtake" are strong, continuous verbs. And what it's saying is that the fact that you do not keep these laws automatically invokes the curses which will follow you. And there's nothing you can do to stop those curses except to start obeying the law. That's the only way you can stop the curse. It's sort of like if you open the spigot, the water runs. What do you have to do to get the water to stop? You have to turn it off. Well, that's the way the curses are. When you stop doing God's law, the faucet opens and the curses start coming. And if the only way you can stop it is you got to turn the spigot off, you got to start obeying the law. So let's look at it. In verse 16, he said, "Cursed shalt thou be in the city, and cursed shalt thou be in the field." Now, I want you to think about that. My wife was raised in the city. You were raised in St. Louis, weren't you?
Yes.
Were there days when you were a young girl that you could walk around in the neighborhood without fear?
Yes.
You played in the parks.
Yes.
You walked over to your girlfriend's house. And I know she showed me where it was, and it was like a mile. I don't know, it was quite a ways. Would you dare go out at 10 o'clock at night or walk that distance tonight? No, because it's dangerous. Our cities have become cursed. In fact, I'm surprised at how much crime there is in Branson. I always thought that was a family town, you know. You always look at that as being a family town. But it's become a place where it's cursed. And the cities, especially I remember New York City. How many of you have been to New York City? Anybody here been to New York City? Okay. What did you see?
People.
Lots of
It was bad.
It was bad when I was.
Did you see anything bad? Yeah. I remember in the 60s, when I was an engineer with Ralston Purina, they sent me to a convention in New York City. And I'd never been to New York City. And the first thing I noticed, I got there and got off the airplane and I got in my cab and I went to the hotel and it was dark. So I went in, got my room, went up. I was on the 15th floor or somewhere up there, I don't know where. And I noticed as I got ready to go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, the motors were rumbling, the tires were running, the buses were going just like they were at 12 noon. I mean, it's 24 hours a day, it just goes, 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 and goes. And I didn't sleep first night. I'm used to birds chirping. I'm not used to horns honking as I go to sleep. But even in the 60s, New York City has been a model of merging of all races around the world coming into that city. In fact, they will tell you that New York City is such a wonderful place because you can walk down the street and you can get Roman pizza, or you can get some other kind of pizza, Sicily pizza, or you can, they got all these places you can get all these different varieties of pizza. But what they don't tell you is you may get mugged while you're doing it. So the cities have become a place where it's no longer possible to raise your family in a way that you want to raise your family. In fact, there are people moving into this area from California and from the East Coast who are wanting to get away from those places where there is such a high crime rate. So, would you say that we are being cursed in our cities today? Absolutely. Well, what about the fields? You say, well, out here in the country, what's wrong with our fields? Are we being cursed in our fields? How are we being cursed in our fields? How many of you have actually lived or visited or driven through Iowa or Nebraska or Kansas or Illinois, for instance, the great fields? You know, when I drive through there, I look at those farms, and that's the only thing about me that is, the Bible says we're not supposed to covet. Well, I look at those farms, and in my blood, I like farming. I like farming. I got fruit trees out here, and I like to plant a garden. I like to be in the dirt. But what's wrong? What's wrong with our fields? How are they cursed?
producing chemicals.
Chemicals. The chemicals. But for instance, in Nebraska, I remember that they put those things down where they put in nitrogen in the ground. And it even seeps into your water, and after a while you're drinking this stuff. But it makes the food less valuable for your body. I had a friend who was a scientist, and one day he pulled me in his lab and he said, I don't know what the machine was that he had, but he had some green beans. And he had some green beans that were grown organically and fertilized organically. And he put those in this little machine, and it would read out, I don't know what it was called, but it would tell you how good a bean it was for your body. And it would be, and it came out like 90%. He said this bean was grown on a farm, thousands of acres, artificial fertilizer, put it in there, it was less than 10%. You could have actually eaten a ton of those beans, become as fat as a pig, and still be sick. It didn't build your body. It didn't give you the nutrients that you needed. Verse 17, cursed shall be thy basket and thy store. What is the basket? It's the harvest. The Lord says, when I curse a nation, eventually the pests and the storms and all of the pestilence that comes upon a crop will destroy the crop. How many of you remember when the crop of oranges were destroyed? Orange price went up. And even this year, the flooding along the Mississippi and the Missouri River is going to take out a large portion of the corn. And what's that going to do to our gas prices? Because they use corn to make ethanol to put in the gas. And so it is our harvest. The basket is our harvest. What's the store? The store is where you storage, where you keep it, the keeping of it. And it's not as keepable. When I was a kid and we farmed with horses, and we had real cow manure, and we had real horse manure, and we went out and put it on the fields, and when we would get a crop, we would put it in the bin, and everything in the world wanted to eat it. It was good, and it lasted, and it was effective. But nowadays, I've even talked to some farmers who say they can't even get the mice to eat the corn anymore because it's so nutrient deficient. The mice won't even eat it. So the Lord is saying, I'm going to make it hard for you to grow a crop, and then when you do get a crop, I will see that it does not store well. You say, is the Lord going to do that to us? Yes, if we don't follow His law, if we don't obey His law. Verse 18, cursed shall be the fruit of thy body, and the fruit of thy land, the increase of thy kind, and the flocks of thy sheep. So he starts out with the fruit of our body. Well, we all know what that is. That's our children. Our children are our fruit. And look at the number of children that have been born either aborted or they've been born deficient. How many of you got acquainted with Debbie Skipper down there at the conference? Any of you remember her? The one that she had the natural medicine over by the wall. They live in Oklahoma. We're going to go down there next week. They're having feast days this coming week. And so we're leaving tomorrow. We're going to go down. What you don't know about that lady is that she had a little boy. What was his name? Do you remember? Brian. Had a little boy named Brian. And he had leukemia. Don't know how old he was, 5 or 6 years old. 4 years old. Well, everybody tells us how wonderful the hospital in Memphis is.
St. Jude's.
What is it called?
St. Jude's.
St. Jude's. St. Jude. I don't know how many of you know this. They did not know this. But it is a Jewish research hospital. That's a lot different than just being a hospital. In fact, when they took this little boy down there and put him in the hospital, she began to see what they were doing with all of the children. And she didn't want her baby to be there. And she picked up her baby and started to leave, and the guard met her and said, "You can't leave." And she told her dad, and her dad came down and they looked, and the fences outside didn't come up and go out, they come up and went in. Because they wanted that child for research. They actually stole that baby out of the hospital. She had to run to Mexico. They had warrants all over this country out for her and her dad and her child. And they were going to take that child away from her and put it back in the hospital and put her in jail. And she had to live in Mexico. The boy down there got real treatment. And he went into remission. But they couldn't come home because they still wanted to arrest her. If you ever go to their place, you'll understand why they live where they do. They live in a very strange looking place. But he had to hide. They hid. They had to go out through the tunnels in the back end to get out and come in. because the police were sitting in the front, ready to arrest him when they saw him. So the family went down, his brothers and all of them went down to see him. I've got the book. I'm trying to get it republished so that you can read it.
Brian and the Beast.
It's called Brian and the Beast. His grandpa wrote it. The boy got in remission. The family went to see him. They had a great time. And then the family left. And the next day, the little boy comes into his mother crying and saying, you know, I'm never going to get to be with my family. He said, I'm just tired of this. I'm going to go home to Jesus. 2 weeks later, he died. But now, were they cursed? No. The problem is, when a nation is cursed, it's usually the best people who suffer the brunt. They may not have any sin at all that's being a problem. But we have allowed society to get to the place where it dumps upon us because we have forsaken. How many of you know enough about the history of this nation to know that when the pilgrims came here, they established God's law as the law of the land? That was the law of the land. And when you sat on a jury, number one is you had to be a man. You couldn't be a woman. Now immediately women take offense. But hey, women are under the protection of the man. And if he's not doing his job, then she got the wrong man maybe. But the men sat on the jury. And they could not sit on a jury unless they, number one, said, I'm a Christian, and number two is, I know the law of God. That's why I always enjoyed reading about the young guy that he stole chickens. He stole 5 chickens. And they arrested him and brought him in, and he had a jury trial, and they said, yep, you're guilty. And now you got to pay 25 chickens back. You stole 5. Got each, read the Bible, we'll come to it a little bit later. It says if you steal anything, you got to give them 5 back. Unless it's an oxen, then you got to give 6. Why was an oxen so important? That's the only tractor they had. They plowed with them. They did all their heavy work with them. So the fruit of the body, and then the fruit of the land. We know what the fruit of the land is. Our crops. The increase of our kind. What's a kind? K-I-N-E. That's a cow. So he's saying our flocks, our sheep, the meat we eat is going to be contaminated. The meat we eat is going to be scarce. So that's what we have if we don't obey the laws of God as a nation. Verse 19. Cursed shalt thou be when thou comest in, and cursed shalt thou be when thou goest out. Now I spent quite a bit of time on that verse because I thought, come in, go out, come in, go out. I see myself going out the door, coming in the door. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about traveling. You're going to take a trip somewhere, or you're going to come home from your trip. It's going to be dangerous. Now we're going to go to Oklahoma tomorrow, and we think, well, we live in Missouri, we live in the Ozarks. We're going to drive through Arkansas. Probably not going to be we're not expecting any armies. We're not expecting it, but we could be, because we live in a country where there are Muslims moving in all over. What would you do? What would you do if all of a sudden we had 1,000 Muslim families move into this area? And then they said, well, we're going to run somebody against Mr. Smith as our representative for the Congress. That's what they did in New York. We'll come to a place a little later that says that when we don't obey the laws of God, then they that are not of us will get over us. And that's what's happening. Our coming in is traveling for business or pleasure, or even for war. How can that be cursed? Trouble, all kinds, people, things. What is our going out? How can that be cursed? Verse 20. The Lord shall send upon thee cursing, vexation, and rebuke. You know, when I read through these and began to study, I said, you know, the Lord must hate us quite a bit to do all this. This is really a lot of stuff that He's planning to put on us. He says He's going to send upon us cursing, vexation, and rebuke. Well, I know what cursing is, and I'm not talking about using God's name in vain here. He's talking about what we call imprecatory prayers. Now, we have a right to use imprecatory prayers against the enemy. But He's saying here, if we don't obey His law, we're His enemy, and He's going to do them against us. Woo! He gets all His prayers answered. So we've got to be careful. And vexation, which means frustration, psychological problems. When we were in our trial in Nebraska over a Christian school, you know the two kind of people they brought in to testify against us? One was psychologists. What do you know about a psychologist?
Jewish science.
It's Jewish science, it's true. It's. Have you ever heard of Pavlov's dog? See if I can do this. Some of you weren't here when I showed the picture of how God made us. He made us with a flesh, made us with a soul, and then He put a spirit in us. A dog or a cow or a horse has a body, has a soul. You say a horse has a soul? Yeah. You know what the soul's made up of? How many of you know what the soul's made up of? Anything? I've taught that, but you didn't catch it real quick. The soul is made up of the mind. Does a cow have a mind? Emotions. Can a cow get mad? A bull get mad? And will. Mind, emotions, and will. I have a mind. I can love you or hate you, and that will make me decide to do certain things. The only thing that animals don't have is they don't have that Spirit of God that we have. Psychologists deal with the animal part. They cannot deal with the spirit part. I've seen it. I've ministered in prisons and I've been in prison. And I'll tell this story. I don't tell it too often. And I'm not really bragging because it was God that did it. But you can watch. And you know, 85% of the people in prison are not our kind of people. And I talk about our race. They'll do anything. I mean, if they threaten them with a hole, you know what the hole is, throw them in the hole. They can threaten them with privilege taken away. They can threaten them with, and those people will do whatever they have to do. But they can't do that with our people. I remember one time, one of the guards came to me and said, "You have to do this," and it included my social security number and a few other things. And I said, "Well, I'm not going to do that." And they said, "Well, we'll throw you in the hole." I said, "Here, take me. I'm ready." He actually jumped back about 2 feet. He had never had anybody do that. But there's something in us that is not going to let the wicked rule over us. And God is saying, if you don't obey my laws and if you give in to the wickedness of the time, I will actually put people over you who vex you, who deal with your animal part of you. If you live by the animal and not the spirit, the Bible calls it flesh. Oh, I go to the movies and I'll watch them because I like them. Well, there's some movies okay. I'm not condemning all movies. I like Peter Rabbit pretty good. You know, some of those kind. But there are a lot of movies that appeal to the flesh. And if we live by the flesh, then we are easily controlled by the flesh. He says, I'll give you vexation and rebuke. And the word rebuke here is really stronger than it's translated. The word rebuke here, it's hard for me to visualize this, and so please forgive me, I may not be able to do it justice. But he says, I will rebuke you, and in essence what he's saying is the same thing he's saying in Proverbs, where he says, I will make fun of you. When you're in your trouble and you're crying and you're saying, Lord, help me, I'm going to laugh at you. And I say, God, please don't do that. But if we don't repent and get back to his law, he will. 21, the Lord shall make the pestilence. And the word pestilence here is the same word for the plague of Muran in Egypt. Do you remember when Moses was trying to get the people out of Egypt, and the king said no, and the Lord sent this Muran. The word Muran is very difficult to understand, but it's actually a plague of different diseases upon the cattle. The cattle died, the sheep died, the horses died, and even some people died. It's a sickness among the animals. So I will cleave unto thee until he have consumed thee from off the land, whether thou goest to possess it. Whither thou goest. Doesn't matter where you go. You're going to move to the United States of America. If you don't obey me, I'll wear you out there. Doesn't matter where you go. Muran is an antiquated term for various infectious diseases affecting cattle and sheep. It literally means death. Did not refer to a specific disease. It included rinderpest and erysipelas, foot and mouth disease, anthrax, streptococcus, and epidemic of many different diseases. Exodus 9:3, it says, Behold, the hand of the Lord is upon thy cattle, which is in the field, upon the horses, upon the asses, upon the camels, on the oxen, on the sheep. And there was a very grievous Muran. That was when Moses was dealing with it. And verse 22, the Lord shall smite thee with a consumption. How many of you, that's an old term. Did any of you remember your folks ever using that term? Had consumption.
TB.
Huh?
TB.
TB.
Cancer.
It could be any kind, but what it does is it eats away at your body, and no matter what you eat, you lose weight, you become weaker and weaker, and you lose the ability to carry on. And with extreme burning, which is a fever, and with a sword, with blasting and mildew, all of these things God says, I will hit you with. And thy heaven that is over thy head shall be brass, and the earth that is under thee shall be iron. Now I was taught in Bible college that the word brass here said that our prayers wouldn't be answered, but that's not what this verse is saying. This verse is saying the heaven over thee, thy head shall be brass, and the earth shall be iron, because there's not going to be any rain. The next verse says it, and the Lord shall make the rain of thy land powder and dust. From heaven it shall come down upon thee until thou be destroyed. Here's the problem. Every time we have something God gives us that's bad, we spend lots of time and lots of money coming up with an alternative to do away with God's judgment. What did we do when we had lots of, remember the Dust Bowl in Kansas? What did that promote? What did that prompt? What happened after that? The engineers went to work and said, we have to figure out how to irrigate. We'll stop God. We'll drill a well and put water out on the land, and he will not be able to do that anymore. But of course we know that that's not really true. I traveled in Israel, Palestine, I should say. I traveled in Palestine in 1984. My wife and I went. We got a free ticket, so we went. And they took us out and they showed us the fields of food and all the things they grew. And what did they have out there? Up in Nebraska, there's a company up there that makes these irrigators that go out and they got wheels on them and they go around and they can irrigate thousands of acres for those things. And that's how they do it. And you know what Christians say when they see that? They think about the prophecy that God gave where Israel was to go into the wilderness and make it bloom and blossom. Well, take the irrigators away and they won't bloom and blossom over there. But it does here, unless God takes the rain.
Yeah, but they bought them from us.
Huh?
So they bought them from us.
Yeah, right there you go. They didn't buy them, we gave them to them.
We stole it.
no rain from Judah's sky. The Lord, in verse 25, shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Thou shalt go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and shall be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth, and thy carcasses shall be meat unto all fowl of the air, and unto the beasts of the earth, and no man shall fray them away. Now this passage was literally fulfilled when Israel was carried away into captivity. But it's happening to us. We've been fighting no-win wars ever since Korea. We're
48.
huh?
We haven't prevailed since 48.
Yeah.
That's when we stole it from the Palestinians.
Yeah.
Gave it to them. That was,
Well, it was given back to the British, and rightfully so. The prophecy said it would go back to Israel. The problem is we turned around and gave it away.
That's
Gave it away to the Khazars and the Edomites that have taken it over. All right. The Lord will, in verse 27, will smite thee with a botch. Again, that's ulcers. Or with emrods, that's swelling and tumor. With a scab, that's a scratching. With an itch, whereof thou canst not be healed. The Lord shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart. The same verse is over in the New Testament where he says, and their hearts will fail them. We have, what's the #1 killer in America? Heart disease. And thou shalt grope at noonday, and as blindness gropeth in the darkness, and you will not prosper, and you will be spoiled or robbed. I'm going to quit here pretty soon because we're going to run out of time. Verse 30, thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build a house, and thou shalt not dwell therein. Thou shalt plant a vineyard, and shall not gather the grapes thereof. I cannot say that we've totally reached that place at this point in our country, but we're certainly getting well on our way because there is a large number of people who get married and it doesn't last very long. Your sin will make the society so sick, you will be the victim. Verse 31, thine ox shall be slain before thine eyes, thou shalt not eat thereof. And thine ass shall be violently taken away from before thy face, and shall not be restored to thee. Thy sheep shall be given unto thine enemies, and thou shalt have none to rescue them. When I was in the jail in Nebraska over the Christian school, they brought a guy in there, a young guy. He probably was in his late 20s. And when they had a graduation from the high school, he had some friends who had graduated, and he wanted to throw a big party. So he told his friends to come over, and they were going to have a big barbecue and a whole bunch of things. Of course, they were throwing in the beer and everything else with it. Well, what he did is he took his truck, backed it up down in a little town not far from where I pastored, and there was a Foxley's yard where they fattened out cattle. They buy thousands and thousands of cattle for the yards in Nebraska and Colorado and Wyoming, and they operate it all out of an office in Omaha. And they have a computer, and they can actually mix the feed, and it'll screw it out onto the feeders, and then they had cowboys that would drive around and kind of watch after the cattle. They were in pens, and it was muddy, it was dirty. But this young man backed his truck pickup up to the fence and got over and took a 22 and shot him one of them and drug her up and pulled her over the fence and put her in the back of the truck and then cut his throat and let it bleed all the way home, which wasn't real smart, because that's all the sheriff followed the blood trails and found out where he went. The part, though, that is disturbing, when they got this guy and they found the meat in his freezer, did they take the meat? No. He kept the meat. Did they say, young man, you're going to have to pay Mr. Foxley for that cattle? No. Didn't say that. In fact, they gave him 60 days in the jail where they fed him. Foxley had to buy, with their taxes, food for him to eat, pay for television for him to watch, and pay his medical bills, and pay everything about him, and then he was free to go. And the Lord says, when you don't follow the laws of God, that's what you get. You not only lose what you have, you pay the guy that took it here for me. Verse 32, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day, and there shall be no might in their hand. I take this one very personally. I think most of you know that I have a granddaughter that married a black guy. Very much against my you know, it grieved me to have to tell her that she and her man are no longer welcome in this house. But that's what you have to do. She basically cut herself off from the covenant of God. I don't know what her future is. Will I see her in eternity? I don't know. My personal feeling is no. You know, if she'd been as ugly as a mud fence, I might understand it, but she's not. She's beautiful. Verse 32 is the one we just looked at. We'll be hated, we'll be robbed. Did you know that the income tax was installed in 1913 primarily for the purpose of remodeling the social structure of America? They take your money and give it to people they want to be increased and you to be decreased. I have a book called The Christian Income Tax. I don't pass it out much anymore, but it's in my IRS file. They know what I said. It says, children will forsake their mother and father physically and ideologically. The fruit of thy land, verse 33, and all thy labor shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up. Folks, that's where we've been. We've been there for a long time. Our money's... They came out the other day and said, Trump said he was going to cut off aid to Guatemala and all those countries. I didn't know he was giving them anything. They didn't tell me. Not that I could do anything about it. We give money to everybody but us. The fruit of the land and thy labor shall the nation that thou knowest not eat up. Verse 34, so that thou shalt be mad. Now the word mad there means insane for the sight of thine eyes, based on what you see. Verse 35, the Lord shall smite thee in the knees and in the legs with a sore botch, ulcerated, that cannot be healed, from the sole of thy foot and the top of thy head. Lots of sickness. He made a promise. You know, when Israel came out of Egypt, he made a promise. He said, if you'll eat what I tell you to eat and obey my laws, I will keep the diseases of Egypt away from you. Now, we haven't studied the food laws yet, and we will in a bit. Not today, but in a few weeks. But I think we all know that the Bible is very clear about shellfish versus fish with scales. And we're not supposed to eat any kind of a scavenger. Would you? How many of you know what a buzzard is? You know what a buzzard is? One of those big black birds that flies around here and falls down and pulls that old dead rabbit out and eats that and throws it. That's a scavenger. Would you like to shoot one of those and fry it up and eat it? No. But yet we eat crawling buzzard every day. It's called pig.
Possum.
Huh?
Possum. Possums is just a scavenger.
Yeah.
Possum good.
You
I
know,
was kidding. I don't know I made a possum.
You know-
but I knew for sure.
I was just getting ready to tell you, I'll take your word for it. But, you know, clams, shrimp, lobsters, they're all scavengers. They're all buzzards. That's what they are.
Suckers.
Suckers, yeah. Catfish. All right, well, enough of that. We'll get on. But lots of sickness because we don't follow his laws. The Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation that neither thou nor thy fathers have known. And there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone. This was literally fulfilled in the lives of our fathers back in Jerusalem and Israel and Samaria. And it's happening to us like it did in Judges. We have times when we call on the Lord and we get good times, and then we forget about the Lord, and we go out and have our good time, and then we get back into trouble again. All right, I'm going to close with this verses 38 and on, because this is where the promise for better things. Thou shalt carry much seed out of the field, and shalt gather but little in, for the locust shall consume it. Thou shalt plant vineyards, dress them, and shall not neither drink of the wine nor gather the grapes, for the worms shall eat them. And it shall have olive trees throughout all thy coasts, but thou shalt not anoint thyself with oil, for thine olive shall cast his fruit. Thou shalt carry much seed into the field, and it will be worthless. And we're going to have olive trees that aren't, we may not have olive trees, but we may have peach trees that don't give us any peaches. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them. All thy trees and fruit of thy land shall the locust consume. And the stranger, who is the stranger? By the way, if you got my new book, there's a chapter in there on strangers. In the Old Testament, there's at least 5 different Hebrew words for strangers. And you have to be careful how you look at them. Because sometimes a stranger was an Israelite who was outside of the community. Sometimes it was an Adamite who was not an Israelite, but he was still considered from the descendants of Adam. And they were called a different kind of stranger. And then when it got to people who were not of our race, they were called Zuwr. Z-U-W-R is one of the words. And if you follow that word in the Old Testament, what happened to someone who was called a Zuwr, stranger, if he came to the tent where the tabernacle was? He was immediately stoned. He was not allowed to go into the congregation. He was not allowed to be a part of the community. He was not allowed to be in the government. He was not allowed to be a part of the running of Israel or worshiping of Israel's God through the covenant sacrifices. But it says here that among us, the strangers that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. And he shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. Now you only have to answer one question here. Who is the stranger that controls the money? If you haven't heard of the Rothschilds, then you haven't heard the whole story. The Rothschild, the word Rothschild means red shield. And he and his grandfather were the ones who set up the paper money schemes. They followed the old. There's a book out written by Dr. Hoskins. Anybody know Richard Hoskins?
Richard Kelly Hoskins.
Synagogue of Satan.
Synagogue of Satan, yeah.
That's
But
what
he's
it
got
is.
one called War Cycles, Peace Cycles.
Yep.
And he tells you where the beginning of paper money began and where it is. Now I'm grateful today to stand before you and tell you that we are well on the way of getting rid of paper money in this country as far as being worthless. And we're praying that it'll happen before they kill the president. He's trying to get it done, and we believe he will. But it's been, I don't know if you knew this or not, but the Federal Reserve is not a federal government bank. It is a private bank. But you know that bank had a 100-year contract from 1913 to 2013. What year are we in? 2019. Their contract ran out in 2013. And from that time to now, they've been gradually decreasing that business. And the Internal Revenue Service is part of that bank. And if they go, the Internal Revenue Service goes. And I happen to know that just 2 weeks ago, I copied offline a bill that has been introduced into the Senate that will abolish the income tax and the Internal Revenue Service. And will replace it with a general sales tax. Now, they're not going to put, because when you see the amount, you're going to say, whoo, I don't know if I like this or not, because it's 23%. But the problem is, the good part is, it's not on food, it's not on medicine, it's not on essentials of life, it's on things like cell phones, new cars, things that are not into production. I don't know if it'll pass, but I know they're trying. They're trying. I hope they get there. I know that they've printed money, new money, and they will print new money again. And they've already moved the Federal Reserve off the top line. It says United States Treasury on top of But you need to know, if this happens, God is giving us one more chance to do it right. And if we mess up, we're going to be in trouble. Deep trouble. I'm going to let you read some of this. And we're not going to have time to go through all of it. But I've given the scriptures that you need to read. Next month we'll go on to another section on the law. And we're going to get into some interesting things. We're going to get into the law on marriage. We're going to get into the law on what if you steal something, or what if you break something? What if somebody lends you an axe and you break the handle? What are you supposed to do? Now, most of us already know. You buy a new handle, fix the axe, don't you? That's what you do. It's almost innate in us. But I'm here to tell you that the parents today are not teaching these principles to their children. And so they're not looking, and I don't mean that 100%, I think these right here have been taught. But I think that I've met many who, they think, there used to be a young boy lived down here, he had a four-wheeler. Now, I personally, I don't care. In fact, I told him he could go up to the end of my orchard. He wanted to get up from down there up here on the road without having to drive all the way on the highway. And I understood that. But he didn't ask. He'd drive through my yard. He'd drive through my orchard. He'd drive all over. And finally I said, hey, whoa, you know, this is not your highway up here. But ask. I went to his dad. I said, you know, I'm not against your boy. If I said, I wish I had a four-wheeler. I'd get out here and ride it too. But I said, he can go up there, and he's free to go up that way. In the orchard, there's a road down there. He can go that way. Or he can go up over here on the right-of-way. He can go there. But I said, he doesn't need to come through my place. And then he stopped it. But shouldn't he have already known that? Somewhere his parents didn't teach him it's right to ask your neighbor, you know. I remember when I was a boy, we lived on that 6,000-acre ranch, had 400 head of cattle and 2 sawmills and all those kind of things. And we were probably, I didn't know it because my stepdad or my uncle who adopted me, he knew how to shield himself. He'd go to town with, you'd have thought he was a teenager. He had those blue jeans with open cuts in them and everything, you know. Back in those days, that meant you were poor. Today it means, oh, you're classy. Those are $300 jeans, you know. I mean, what a waste. I see this ad on TV. This gal says she paid $100 for a pair of shoes. What a price, because they normally went for $700. I can't fathom that. Ladies, would you spend $700 on a pair of shoes? I don't know. Anyway, my parents taught me that we had to walk to meet the bus. And they said, you do not cross the fence, you do not go across the fields, you follow the road. That was the long way to do it. It said, if you want to go across the field, you go up and ask Mr. Agee if he minds. Well, we didn't want to go ask, so we stayed on the road. But we were taught that there was respect for property. If we break something, we fix it. If we find something that doesn't belong to us, we try to find the owner of it. We don't take it, hide it, and sell it real fast and try to make a buck on it. These are the laws that make God's covenant people a peaceful nation to live in. And today we're not in that nation because we've let too many other people in that don't go to those laws. And our own people do. Anybody have a question or any comment?
I have a comment. You know, one of the things you didn't mention here, if you read Deuteronomy 28 again, you'll notice that the blessings part was only verse 1 through 14, and then the whole rest of the things about the curses. That falls all the way through the Bible. This is the whole concept back here at the beginning of the wheat and the tares. The people who follow God's command and they teach their children to do that and all that kind. Those are the wheat. And the tares are the ones that rejected all the way back from basically started at Mount Sinai. So the whole Bible focuses on that. Even in the New Testament, there are a whole bunch of quotes right back to the Old Testament about this very thing that he's teaching. That's the core issue of it being important, is that it applies to us, number one, but there's a lot of there's a lot more in the Bible, a lot more verses dedicated to the people that what God's going to do to you if you do not follow His law. And the reason is because you're His people and you're His responsibility.
Right.
So,
Good.
because He says there right at the beginning, you're the peculiar people. So you're His, and if you don't do what He tells you to, then there's a whole bunch of negative consequences, and that'll follow you all your life, whether you want it or not. I know, because as soon as you get a dirt bike, you forget everything about where you can go and where you can't. I can tell you that from experience.
Anybody else? All right.